I walked out of work feeling that familiar weight pressing against my shoulders, the kind that comes after a long day of pretending everything is fine. The parking lot was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat feel louder than it should. I was reaching for my keys when 4 women suddenly stepped into my path. They weren't confident or bold. Their hands shook, their breaths came short, like people carrying something too painful to keep inside. For a second, I thought maybe they were lost or confused, but the way they looked at me, like they already knew my name, my story, my life, sent a cold ripple down my spine. The oldest one took a small step forward, her voice trembling as she whispered my name. "Are you Haley? Nick's wife?" And instantly my stomach tightened, the kind of twist that tells you something is wrong long before your mind catches up. I glanced between them, trying to place their faces, wondering if maybe they were former coworkers of Nick's or distant acquaintances I'd forgotten. But no, there was fear in their eyes. Real fear, the kind that makes your breath catch in your throat. Before I could piece anything together, another woman leaned in and said, "Please, we need to talk to you. It's about Nick." And that was the moment the air changed for me. Because something in her voice, soft, urgent, almost apologetic, told me whatever they were about to say wouldn't just bruise my world. It might break it wide open. And yet, I felt myself nodding, almost against my own will, sensing that this wasn't a warning I could ignore, no matter how much I wished I could. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the confusion wrapped around me like fog. "Did something happen? Do I know you?" I asked, even though every instinct told me I didn't. One of them shook her head, her eyes glistening in that heartbreaking way that says, "I wish I didn't have to be the one to tell you this." Another woman stepped closer and whispered, "Not here. Please. 10 minutes. The cafe across the street." And the way she said it, quiet, almost protective, made my pulse throb in my ears. I didn't know these women, yet they looked at me like I deserved the truth more than anyone. That alone scared me. For a split second, I thought about saying no. About getting into my car, driving home, making dinner, and pretending this strange moment in the parking lot never happened. But their eyes. There was something raw in them, something wounded. It felt like standing in front of a house with smoke leaking from the windows. You don't know what's burning yet, but you know someone inside is screaming. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten as if preparing for a blow I couldn't name. "Fine," I finally said, though it barely came out. 10 minutes. As we crossed the street together, I kept glancing at them from the corner of my eye, trying to read the pieces they weren't saying yet. They stayed close, almost forming a protective circle around me, and that made my nerves spike even more. My mind ran through every possible scenario. Maybe Nick had helped them. Maybe he'd wronged them at work. Maybe... God, I didn't even know. By the time we reached the cafe door, my palms were damp, my heartbeat uneven. And deep down, under all the confusion and fear, a small, cold certainty began to grow. Whatever waited for me inside that cafe wasn't just information. It was about to change everything I thought I knew. When we finally sat down inside the cafe, I could barely feel my own legs beneath me. The place smelled like warm pastries and roasted coffee, but none of it comforted me. I watched the women settle into their seats, hands clasped, shoulders tense, eyes avoiding mine, as if each one was gathering the courage to rip open a wound they had spent months trying to stitch shut. My breath hitched. Whatever they were about to share wasn't casual, wasn't small, and definitely wasn't something I could unhear. I felt like I was sitting on the edge of a cliff, waiting for a push. One of them leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You deserve to know everything." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and tightened their grip around my ribs. My pulse fluttered, and for a second I wondered if I should stop them, if I should say I didn't want to hear another word, but I couldn't. I needed to understand why four strangers looked at me with a mix of guilt, compassion, and terror. I folded my hands on the table, hoping it would steady me. It didn't. Then she looked me straight in the eyes. No shaking, no blinking, no hesitating, and said with this heartbreaking certainty, "It's about your husband, Haley." And right there, in that tiny corner of the cafe with its soft music and overworked baristas, the world I knew began to crack. I felt my breath catch, the way it does when you're bracing for a storm you can't outrun. A part of me wanted to walk out, but another part, the part that sensed the truth hiding in their silence, stayed seated, waiting for the impact I could feel building in the air around us. We sat at a small table tucked into the farthest corner, the kind of spot people choose when they don't want to be overheard. My heart thudded so loudly I swore the whole cafe could hear it. The women exchanged hesitant glances, like they were silently deciding who would be the one to break me open first. Finally, the woman closest to me exhaled shakily and said, "We all had a relationship with Nick." For a second, the words didn't register. They just hovered in the space between us, impossible and unreal, like a sentence spoken in a foreign language my brain refused to translate. But when the meaning hit me, it hit hard. Sharp. Cold. Like stepping barefoot on broken glass. "That's impossible," I whispered, though it sounded more like I was pleading with reality to behave. "My husband would never—" But another woman lifted her hand gently, as if stopping me from walking straight into traffic. "He told each of us he was single." Her voice was soft, almost protective, and somehow that made it hurt even more. I felt the blood drain from my face, the edges of the cafe blurring, as if my mind had to warp the world just to make space for this new, horrifying truth. And then the third woman, her eyes already shining with tears, added, "At first he's charming. Perfect. Then the manipulation starts." My chest tightened, a slow, crushing pressure that made it hard to breathe. Charm. Perfect. Manipulation. Words I'd never dared to link together when thinking of my husband. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, but nothing could stop the way those words sank into me, heavy and poisonous like ink seeping into paper. I wanted to defend him. I wanted to defend my life. But the fear in their eyes, it didn't leave much room for denial. I tried to swallow the panic rising in my chest, but it clung to my throat like smoke. Emotional blackmail. Threats. He ruined our lives one by one. The fourth woman said it quietly, like she was confessing something she still couldn't fully believe had happened to her. And the way her voice trembled at the end, God, it tore at me. My mind raced, pulling up every memory I had of Nick. The jokes at dinner, the late-night talks, the mornings he kissed my forehead before work. None of it matched the monster they were describing, and yet their stories aligned with this terrifying precision that made my skin prickle. They began sharing details, dates he took them on, gifts he bought, the lies he repeated word for word. And as each puzzle piece fell into place, I felt my world tilting. Everything I'd built with him suddenly felt like a stage set, beautiful from a distance, but hollow when touched. My breath grew shallow, my hands numb, and I could barely keep up with the flood of truth crashing into me. It was like watching my own life from the outside, powerless to stop it from crumbling. Every new detail stabbed deeper, and I could feel my heart straining, trying and failing to hold on to the version of Nick I thought I knew. When one of them reached across the table, her voice gentle, she said, "We know this hurts, but you deserve to know who he really is." And that was it. Something inside me cracked open. The tears came before I could stop them, hot, uncontrollable, falling faster than I could wipe them away. I hated crying in front of strangers, but in that moment, I wasn't crying for them. I was crying for the woman I had been that morning, blissfully unaware. Crying for the future I thought I had. crying for the realization that the man I loved, the man I trusted, might have never truly existed at all. I buried my face in my hands, trying to hold myself together, but the sobs just kept coming, raw, uneven, the kind that shake your whole body from the inside out. I felt the women watching me, not with judgment, but with that quiet understanding only people who've been broken the same way can offer. The cafe noises, espresso machines, clinking cups, soft chatter, faded into a dull hum. It was surreal, sitting there surrounded by strangers who somehow knew the darkest, most painful truth of my marriage before I did. It felt like my life had split open right on that table. When I finally lifted my head, my vision was blurry, not just from the tears, but from the sheer disbelief twisting inside me. "Nick loves me," I whispered, though it sounded like I was trying to convince myself more than them. "He's always been good to me." The moment the words left my mouth, a fresh wave of grief hit, because even as I said it, I felt how fragile it sounded, like glass cracking under its own weight. How could the man who held my hand at my mother's funeral be the same man who tormented these women? How could two versions of him exist in one body? One of them reached out gently, her touch light but grounding. "You deserve the truth, Haley," she said softly. And something about the way she said my name, steady, compassionate, made me breathe a little deeper, even through the pain. I wiped my face with shaking hands, realizing that whatever illusion I'd been living in was gone now. Completely gone. And as the silence settled between us, heavy but honest, I felt a strange pull inside me, a small, trembling spark of something I didn't expect to feel yet. Not acceptance, not strength, but the beginning of a question that would change everything. What comes next? I sat there, still recovering from the weight of everything they had just told me, when one of the women took a slow breath and said, "We met in group therapy." Her voice carried this quiet mixture of shame and strength, like someone who had crawled through the fire and was finally learning to stand again. I looked at them, really looked, and saw it, the exhaustion behind their eyes, the courage it took just to sit here, the unspoken bond they shared. A bond forged not by friendship, but by surviving the same man. The thought made my stomach turn. "We were talking about this charming man," another woman said, her fingers twisting the napkin in front of her. "The way he made us feel seen at first, and then how he changed." Her eyes flicked up to mine, searching for understanding, maybe even permission to continue. I nodded because I needed to know, even if the truth felt like it was scraping something raw inside me. As she spoke, it was like watching puzzle pieces click together, pieces I never wanted to own, but suddenly recognized anyway. Their stories weren't similar by coincidence. They matched with a disturbing, perfect symmetry. And then the third woman leaned forward, her voice steadier than before. "When we compared details, we realized it was the same man, Nick Ainsworth, your husband." Hearing his full name felt like being punched in the chest. Not just Nick, not just my husband, Nick Ainsworth, the man at the heart of 4 different traumas, and now mine. My breath hitched, my fingers trembling against the edge of the table. I pressed my hands to my face, as if covering my eyes could shield me from a truth that had already settled deep inside me. I felt like the floor had tilted, leaving me clinging to whatever pieces of myself hadn't yet fallen. I lowered my hands slowly, trying to steady my breathing, but my chest felt tight, like someone was pulling invisible strings around my ribs. "Oh my God! All this time! I thought he was perfect," I managed to whisper. And hearing myself say those words, hearing the innocence in them, hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. Because I hadn't just loved Nick. I had trusted him with the most vulnerable parts of me. I had built my life around the version of him he showed me. And now it felt like someone had flipped on the lights in a room I'd lived in for years, revealing all the cracks I'd never noticed. One of the women reached out, her voice firm but kind. "He's dangerous, Haley, and you're the only one he still has power over." The sentence hit me like cold water. Dangerous. I had never associated that word with my husband, not once. But the conviction in her voice, the way the others nodded in silent agreement, made something shift inside me. It was like the fog around Nick was thinning, revealing a shape I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I laced my fingers together on the table, trying to keep them from shaking. Part of me still wanted to run, to deny everything, to cling to the illusion. But another part, quiet, wounded but awakening, knew I couldn't. Then the youngest woman leaned in, her eyes soft but unwavering. "You can help us. Together we can stop him. Permanently." The word permanently lingered in the air, heavy and terrifying but also strangely grounding. Like I was standing at a crossroads I never asked for, forced to choose between staying blind or finally seeing everything. My heart pounded, my breath unsteady, and yet, beneath the chaos, something else stirred, a spark of resolve I didn't know I had. It felt like my soul was lifting its head after being kept quiet for too long, ready to face the truth, no matter how brutal. I lifted my head slowly, wiping the last warm tear from my cheek with the back of my hand. Something inside me felt different, like the ground beneath me had shifted, but instead of falling, I was finally finding my footing. The women watched me with this quiet patience, as if they knew exactly what it felt like to sit on the edge of a choice big enough to change your entire life. My voice trembled when I finally spoke, but it didn't matter. "Tell me what you need." And the moment those words left my mouth, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief wash through me, like opening a door I'd kept locked for far too long. Their faces softened, some with gratitude, others with a painful kind of understanding that only comes from surviving the same man. One of them reached for my hand, her touch warm and steady, as if grounding me to the table, to myself, to the reality I could no longer turn away from. I realized then that I wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. These women had been living in the shadows of his manipulation long before I knew those shadows even existed. And now, for the first time, I felt that invisible thread binding us together. Not just as victims, but as women reclaiming pieces of themselves he had tried to take. As the cafe lights flickered softly above us and footsteps echoed from the counter, I felt something shift inside me. A fragile but unmistakable resolve settling into place. My world had shattered, yes, but in the fragments I could see something I hadn't noticed before. The possibility of taking back control. The possibility of justice. The possibility of standing with these women instead of standing in the dark. And as I exhaled, slow and shaky, I sensed that whatever came next would demand more strength than I'd ever needed. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid to find it. We met again that same night, long after the sky had settled into that deep, heavy darkness that makes everything feel more secret, more dangerous, more real. I drove to the small apartment where they'd gathered, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I didn't know what scared me more, the truth about Nick or the truth about myself. Because the woman walking into that room wasn't the same one who'd left work earlier. She was someone cracked open and ready to fight. When I stepped inside, the 4 women were already seated around a table covered with documents, texts, screenshots, recordings, evidence of a man I thought I knew. Seeing it all spread out like that made my stomach twist. It was like staring at the autopsy of my marriage. One of them slid a folder toward me, her voice steady. "This is everything he sent us. The threats, the manipulation, the late-night messages." I reached for it with shaky hands, feeling the weight of the paper as if it were made of stone. Each page held pieces of a man I had never met, even though I had shared a bed with him for years. And with each detail I read, his cruel words, his false promises, his calculated threats. I could feel the last traces of denial burning away inside me like dry leaves. Then one of them said something that pulled me straight back into myself. If we combine all of this, it's enough for serious charges. She listed them one by one: coercion, harassment, emotional abuse, and possibly even extortion. I felt a chill run through me, sharp and electric, because hearing the crimes out loud made everything click. This wasn't just betrayal. This was predation. This was a pattern. This was deliberate. And in that moment, I felt a force inside me I didn't recognize. A cold, focused determination rising from the ashes of the woman I had been earlier today. I met their eyes and knew exactly what I needed to do next. I leaned over the table, the dim lamplight casting long shadows across the documents, almost making it feel like Nick himself was hovering there, exposed, stripped of every lie he ever told. "I'll give you access to his emails," I heard myself say, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "His work calendar. Whatever helps." The women exchanged glances, relief mixed with disbelief, because they knew what that meant. I wasn't just accepting the truth anymore. I was stepping into it. And the weight of that choice settled over me, not like fear, but like armor. Heavy, yes, but protective. One of them hesitated, her eyes softening. "Are you sure? This is your husband." The word husband landed differently now, almost foreign, almost like it belonged to someone else's vocabulary. I took a slow breath, feeling the knot in my chest tighten before loosening all at once. "He's not the man I married," I said, my voice low but certain. "He's a predator, and predators don't deserve freedom." Saying it out loud didn't break me. It clarified me. It was like carving truth into stone, sharp, irreversible, necessary. For the first time since this all began, I felt my heart aligning with my actions. They watched as I added what only a spouse could. Bank statements Nick thought I never looked at. Travel receipts that never matched the stories he told. Notes from nights he claimed to be working late. My hands moved with a calm I didn't know I had, organizing the pieces of the puzzle in a way that finally made sense. When I slid the last document into the thick envelope on the table, a sealed case file that could shatter the entire life he'd built through lies, the room fell silent. Not out of fear, but out of awe. And in their eyes, I saw something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Respect and belief in the woman I was becoming. When the envelope was finally sealed, I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything we had gathered inside. It wasn't just evidence, it was the truth, stripped bare and undeniable. The woman closest to me placed her hand on mine, her touch warm and grounding. "Thank you, Haley," she whispered. "You're saving more women than you know." And hearing that cracked something inside me in a different way. Not like heartbreak this time, but like light slipping into a room that had been dark for far too long. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing. And that choice carried a power I hadn't felt in years. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs since the moment those women approached me in the parking lot. The room felt warmer now, almost softer, as if the air itself recognized that something had changed within me. I wasn't the naive, protected version of myself anymore, the one who believed love meant safety and trust meant certainty. I was someone who had walked through the fire of betrayal and was now beginning to see the world clearly, without the fog of Nick's illusions. And that clarity, painful as it was, made me stronger than I expected to be. As we began gathering the papers, preparing the file for the police, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not peace exactly, peace was still far away, but a steady, determined quiet that came from knowing I was finally standing on the right side of my own story. The women moved around me with a kind of synchronized confidence, as if each of us had become part of something bigger, something necessary. And as I closed my bag and stood up to leave, a thought flickered through me like a warning and a promise all at once. This was only the beginning. And tomorrow, everything would change. I showed up at Nick's workplace the following week with a steadiness I didn't recognize in myself. The morning air was crisp, almost too bright, carrying that charged stillness right before a storm breaks. I stood outside the glass building, watching people walk in with their coffees and chatter, completely unaware that everything inside was about to shift. My heartbeat was slow, surprisingly calm, like my body finally understood what my mind had accepted days ago. I wasn't here as a wife hoping for answers. I was here as a woman reclaiming her life. And God, that realization felt like oxygen after months of suffocation. When the police cars rolled up, lights flashing silently, something inside me tightened, not out of fear but out of anticipation. It was surreal, seeing officers march through the doors I'd walked through countless times during company events. But this time, they weren't here for a meeting or a presentation. They were here for him. I stayed back, my hands clasped in front of me, grounding myself in the moment. I thought I would feel nervous or guilty or sick. Instead, I felt present. Fully, intensely present. As if every breath, every heartbeat, every second had led me to this exact place. And then I saw him. Nick emerged from the hallway in handcuffs, confusion turning to panic the moment he spotted me. His hair was disheveled, his tie crooked, and for the first time ever, he looked small, like a man who suddenly realized the walls he built were made of paper. "Haley?" he shouted, his voice echoing across the lobby. "What is this? Why are they arresting me?" People stopped, phones lifted, eyes widened. And there I stood, rooted to the ground, watching the mask I once loved fall apart right in front of everyone. It was the first time I had ever seen him exposed, and the last time he would ever have power over me. He kept shouting my name like it was a lifeline, like the sound alone could drag him back into the world where he still controlled the narrative. "Haley, answer me! What's going on?" His voice cracked in panic, and for a moment I saw the man he pretended to be, the charming smile, the soft apologies, the carefully crafted tenderness he used like bait. But now, stripped of all his rehearsed confidence, he looked at me with something new. Fear. Real fear. And seeing it didn't break me the way I once imagined it would. It steadied me. One of the officers pulled him forward, but he twisted enough to glare at me. "You set me up?" he spat, as if the idea of being held accountable was more offensive than any of the things he'd done. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't sorry, not for them, not for me, not for the years he built his life on deception. I felt my jaw tighten as I stepped closer, my voice low and steady in a way that surprised both of us. "No, Nick," I said. "You set yourself up. I just finally opened my eyes." His face twisted, rage fighting with disbelief, but it didn't move me. Not anymore. Around us, people whispered, cameras clicked, and the whole world seemed to shrink into a single moment, frozen in time. I looked at the man I once loved, the man I defended, trusted, and built a life with, and realized I felt nothing for him now. Not love, not anger, not grief, just distance. A clean, calm distance I had earned the hard way. As the officers pulled him toward the exit, his voice grew louder, desperate, but it no longer had a place inside me. For the first time in years, his words couldn't touch me. They didn't even reach me. As the officers dragged Nick through the front doors, the lobby fell into this eerie silence, like everyone was holding their breath, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The glass doors closed behind him, muffling his shouts, leaving only the hum of the building and the thud of my heartbeat in my ears. I didn't move right away. I just stood there, letting the moment wash over me like a cold wave cleansing everything it touched. For the first time in so long, I felt space inside my chest. Room to breathe, room to think, room to exist without bending myself around his lies. It was like reclaiming oxygen after living underwater. I sensed someone step beside me, and when I turned, it was woman 3, the one whose voice had cracked when she talked about how he broke her spirit. Her eyes were soft now, shining with relief rather than pain. "He'll spend years in prison," she said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile peace settling around us. "He can't hurt anyone now." Her words didn't hit me like triumph. They didn't need to. Instead, they felt steadying, like someone placing a gentle hand on your back and reminding you you're not standing alone. I nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it sink in deeper than I expected. I took a long breath, letting it fill every corner of me, and said, "Good. Let him spend the rest of his life remembering the day we took back ours." And God saying that out loud. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was release. It was closure for the woman I used to be, and a promise to the woman I was becoming. As we stepped out of the building together, 5 women who had crawled out of the same darkness, I felt the sunlight hit my face, warm and almost startling. It felt like a beginning. Maybe not an easy one, maybe not even a clear one, but a beginning that finally belonged to me.